edition of Balance of Power. It's good to see you here on YouTube, where you can always find us. Search Bloomberg Global News and you'll find our live stream direct from the studios at Bloomberg Radio as we turn to the campaign trail. As Joe Biden enjoys the benefits of incumbency, or at least flexes them on his trip to Normandy, we showed you there his speech a short time ago at Pointe du Hoc, speaking again after the 80th anniversary of D-Day commemorations yesterday. He moves on to the G7, doing things that any other candidate cannot do with the trappings of the White House, simply doing the job, as we've discussed. And we have new numbers today as Donald Trump returns to the campaign trail. He had a big rally last night in Arizona, the first big bash since the conviction, a week exactly to the day before he spoke last night. And we've got new numbers out today from Fox News. Fascinating if we look at the state of Virginia as a microcosm of the nation. And I might be pushing a little bit there, but you've got red and you've got blue. Shows Biden and Trump 48% each in a head-to-head matchup in Virginia. But it's the direction that black voters are turning in that makes the real news here. Donald Trump nearly tripling his share of support among black voters. 9% in 2020 in this poll, 25% today. Let's assemble our panel. Jeannie Shanzano is with us, Bloomberg Politics contributor and senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Matt Gorman is here too, Republican strategist, executive VP at Targeted Victory. This is a great panel. Welcome to you both. Happy Friday. Great to see you. Jeannie, you're a pollster, and so I don't want to push this too far here. The state of Virginia does not speak for the nation. But to see them each tied here in a state that should be coming a little bit easier to Joe Biden, looking at this massive shift in the black vote tells you what?
Yeah, and you're doing exactly the right thing in digging down into these demographics because they are fascinating. Virginia, you mentioned the black vote. I would even go out. You look at some of the states they also polled, Nevada, Arizona. You are seeing in those more ethnically diverse states, Donald Trump is hitting over 50%. He is doing better, whereas Joe Biden, for all of his work with Barack Obama, Kamala Harris, attracting the black vote for, many, many years, he is having a tougher time in those more ethnically diverse states, which is ironic. And he's doing not better, but he is holding his own, say, in the more white states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. So it is fascinating as we look at that. And also, I would point you to the gender gap. Donald Trump still losing amongst women, but Joe Biden having a real problem with men. You couple that with young people and African-American or black men, and it is a real challenge. So Virginia is a critical state to look at. We assume it's a must win for Joe Biden, and it's a win, and it looks like it's going to be an uphill battle once again.
Matt Gorman, do you believe the demographic shift that polls like these are showing, and is it enough for Donald Trump to win?
Yes, and let's be honest, right? If Donald Trump wins Virginia, that's not going to be the 271st electoral vote. There's no real way he, say, wins Virginia but loses Pennsylvania, really, or Wisconsin. Right? This is the cherry on top in a lot of respects. And look, the trends in Virginia are what we're seeing nationally too. African American, specifically African American men, going to Trump in large numbers. And look, David Plouffe, who is Obama's campaign manager, he does a podcast with Kellyanne Conway, and he also raised the alarm about young people. He said, can you imagine 10 years ago saying, do we really want to get young people out? Do we want to have all, Democrats are known for the big voter turnout on college campuses, getting the vote out. Mm-hmm. They're saying now, do we really want to do that? And so you see these demographic shifts. Virginia is a microcosm in a lot of ways, but it's a harbinger of if things are bad in Virginia, they're even worse in Nevada or Wisconsin.
Well, I'm going to flip this whole thing over now and point you to the latest Siena College survey in the New York Times. Here is a follow-up on a pool that they've been talking to, interviews with nearly 2,000 voters who had previously taken the Siena College poll. And we've talked to Don Levy here before. They do great work in this shop. They found President Biden. They called all these people back and found President Biden gained slightly in the aftermath of Donald Trump's guilty verdicts. The group favored Mr. Trump by 3 points when originally interviewed in April and May. This week, they backed him by only 1 point. This might seem like a blip on the radar, Jeannie, but it's 7%, and that could be enough to change the outcome of this race. What do you think?
It can be. As you mentioned, we'd have to describe this as a modest shift, but it is certainly a bit of positive news for Joe Biden and the Biden campaign. We're really waiting for the, whole group of these battleground polls post-conviction, including Morning Consult and Bloomberg's own swing state poll, to really see if we can find any shifts. But the New York Times Siena poll is a great poll, as is the Fox, as is the Morning Consult Bloomberg. And the numbers slightly better for Joe Biden in the New York Times Siena, but not enough, I think, for them to breathe a big sigh of relief, to be honest. And, since Donald Trump is out on the West Coast, let me just point to the betting markets. They have Donald Trump up 20. Now, I am a pollster. I like to say the polls are much better than the betting markets, but the betting markets are really important too. And so, I think that's where Democrats are right to be nervous about all those groups that Matt was just talking about, young people, African Americans. And again, if I can underscore men, Joe Biden needs to do better with men. That is a big loss for him if Donald Trump is only down 9 in some of these states with women and Joe Biden is losing by almost 20.
We need to do a good segment, a good story on the betting markets, Jeannie. Let's put the polls side by side and actually it's going to be fascinating to track this for the balance of the survey. Matt Gorman, what do you think? You can show me a poll. You could show me 2 or 3 other polls that show no difference, and maybe even Donald Trump gaining ground in the wake of this guilty verdict. Does it move the needle for you in the end?
I mean, let's be honest, right? If Joe Biden can't gain ground when his opponent is convicted of a felony, when can he? Right? Like, I would hope that he would gain some ground, but even what you're seeing, you're right. He's not all of a sudden up 10. He moved the margins a bit. I think this is kind of tracks with what I said when I was on your show when the conviction came down, Joe. Like, this isn't going to move the needle a writ large one way or another. I candidly am looking towards the debate, and I think if you put truth serum in the Biden campaign's coffee, they would say the debate is going to be much more important to move people one way or another, shake them off the fence, shake them from RFK Jr. possibly. And I think could move people in larger numbers, but it's a risk. It's a risk. Biden, Trump as well. So that's what I would say. If you can't do it when your opponent's convicted of a felony, when can you gain ground?
Little did Matt Gorman know when he joined us in studio a week ago yesterday that he would be the victim of a 2-hour special that included 34 guilty verdicts. That was quite a moment, Matt, and I do appreciate your sharing that with us. And that's the way things go around here. There are no slow days, as I've said. Jeannie, Donald Trump back on the trail in Arizona last night, a big rally. It was the first time he got back on the trail since the verdicts, invoking the word Holocaust to describe the situation at the border, and more specifically referring to reports that the Office of Refugee Resettlement received no response to follow-up calls on about 85,000 migrant children. The children and their sponsors are not required to answer. Health and Human Services says more than 80% of the checkups are successful. But the former president and some Republicans are trying to frame this as 85,000 kids who went missing. I mention this, Jeannie, because we just learned that we have a date now for a visit by Benjamin Netanyahu. He's going to be coming to Washington to speak to a joint session of Congress, July 24. He is said to be closer to Donald Trump than Joe Biden. But we hear a reference like this once again to the Holocaust following the Reich post on Truth Social. How do we qualify their relationship with this kind of rhetoric?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are 2 men who are desperate to hang on to power, who are fearful of what the judicial system in their own countries may do to them if they cannot. And so they find in each other, something that can be helpful to their own personal goals. What I would like to see in the wake of Donald Trump's statements yesterday is some of the outcry that we heard from the Republican leadership in Congress and the GOP concerning issues involving Israel, involving anti-Semitism. I mean, they were attacking students on college campuses who were protesting the war, calling their statements, many of which were anti-Semitic, rightly so. But what about calling out the leader of their own party when he says this kind of thing? Now, that said, I would say this is also an example, Donald Trump pivoting quickly to immigration yesterday. He too is looking at that Virginia poll. When they asked people in Virginia, what do you think Donald Trump does best versus Joe Biden? Immigration and the economy were number one. He was desperate not to see that recede from his grasp because Joe Biden did a smart thing the other day, issuing an EO, which was exactly like Donald Trump's from a few years ago. So he doesn't want to lose the issue, hence the inflamed rhetoric. But again, on that issue of the talking about the Holocaust, where are the GOP calling him out on that the way they did these young people, and in many cases, rightly so, on that issue?
Matt, you can take a swing at that if you want, but I'm compelled to ask you, what's going to happen that week that Benjamin Netanyahu comes to Washington? As I mentioned, we have a date, and there's been a back and forth on this for some time here. July 24th, does the Prime Minister seek to sit down with Donald Trump? Does he go to the White House? Does he talk to both of them?
I mean, I think it's a trend we've been seeing in foreign capitals recently. You'll recall David Cameron, who's a foreign secretary in the UK, went down to Mar-a-Lago. I think there's a reckoning and a recognition that, right now Donald Trump is an even money favorite to be the next president of the United States. And so if you're going to be in power in a foreign capital, you need to have a relationship with these folks. And so, again, Netanyahu and Trump didn't end well, if you'll recall, back in December and January of 2021 or 2020, because Benjamin Netanyahu recognized Biden as the duly elected president. So there are some patching up to do. I am merely curious, number one, how much do Republicans lean in on Israel as an issue the week before the Republican convention? Do they lean in on that? And how does that kind of relate? Because the first week back. And I think coming back to immigration, I think the challenge is, look, I went down to the border with Tim Scott myself when I was working for his presidential campaign last year. I saw the issues, and I saw how, the Overton window has shifted. We saw back in the day, we've been doing this for a long time, always when you talked about border security, you needed to talk about, legal status or citizenship for people here illegally. Right. The window has shifted. You don't need to talk about that anymore. It is purely border security focused, shows that this issue's evolved. The trick is, how do you keep it salient without giving grist for the Democrats to go back on offense?
Some big questions here that are going to take some time to answer. That's why we have our great panel, Matt Gorman and Jeannie Shanzano. We can do anything. And they'll be back in our second hour as we take a closer look at Joe Biden's trip abroad and his speech today at Normandy, the follow-up to what we saw on the 80th anniversary of D-Day. It's coming up next, only on Bloomberg.